Stoicism represents one of the most complete and practically oriented philosophical systems ever created by human thought throughout the history of civilization. This philosophical school, which originated during the Hellenistic era and reached its peak in ancient Rome, offers a profound and consistent system of views on human nature, the structure of the world, and the art of living a worthy life. Unlike many other philosophical movements, Stoicism was never confined to mere academic thinkers. Its principles were tested in the crucible of real life by statesmen, military leaders, slaves, and free citizens, proving its practical value in a wide variety of life circumstances. The origins of Stoic philosophy date back to a turning point in the history of the ancient world, the period following the conquests of Alexander the Great, when Greek culture spread throughout the Mediterranean and traditional polis structures gave way to large Hellenistic states. It was during this time, around 300 BC, that a man destined to found a new philosophical movement appeared in Athens, Zeno of Citium, from the island of Cyprus. According to legend, after a shipwreck that deprived him of all his property, Zeno found himself in Athens, where he became acquainted with philosophy through reading Xenophon's Memorabilia of Socrates. This event radically changed his life, ultimately leading to the creation of his own school. A distinctive feature of Zeno's teaching was that he conducted his conversations not in a closed room, but in the Stoa Poikile, painted stoa, a covered colonnade on the Athenian agora, adorned with famous frescoes by Polygnotus. This public space for walks and meetings gave its name to the entire philosophical school, Stoicism. The early Stoics, including Zeno's followers such as Cleanthes and Chrysippus, developed a comprehensive philosophical system encompassing logic, physics, and ethics, which they compared to an egg: logic, the shell; physics, the white; ethics, the yolk. However, over time, it was the ethical teaching of the Stoics that gained the greatest significance and influence. While Stoicism initially developed within the framework of classical Greek philosophical tradition, after being transplanted into the Roman cultural environment, it underwent significant changes, becoming less scholastic and more practical. This process of transformation took several centuries and reached its culmination in the works of three great representatives of Roman Stoicism: Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius, whose works remain the most accessible and relevant introductions to Stoic thought to this day. Lucius Annaeus Seneca, 4 BC, 65 AD, also known as Seneca the Younger, was not only a philosopher but also a statesman, tutor to Emperor Nero, playwright, and one of the wealthiest men of his time. His life became a vivid example of how philosophical principles could be combined with active public service. In his works, particularly in Letters to Lucilius, Seneca developed ideas about the brevity of life, managing anger, overcoming the fear of death, and the true nature of wealth. His tragic death, by order of Nero, he opened his veins, became a kind of final lecture on the Stoic attitude toward death. Epictetus, circa 138 AD, represents a completely different social perspective in Stoicism. Beginning his life as a slave in the household of Emperor Nero's secretary Epaphroditus, after gaining freedom, he became one of the most respected philosophers of his time. His teachings, recorded by his student Arrian in the Discourses and Enchiridion, are distinguished by exceptional clarity and practical orientation. It was Epictetus who most consistently developed the key Stoic idea of distinguishing between what is in our power and what is beyond our control. His philosophy is one of personal freedom achieved through mental discipline and correct judgments about events. Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, 121–180 AD, the Roman emperor of the Antonine dynasty, represents a unique example of a philosopher king. His Meditations, or to himself, written in camp conditions during military campaigns on the Danube frontier, are personal notes in which he reminds himself of Stoic principles. These records were never intended for publication, making them particularly sincere and valuable as evidence of the practical application of philosophy under conditions of supreme responsibility and constant pressure. The core of Stoic teaching is the concept that our well-being depends solely on ourselves, on our judgments, values, and how we choose to respond to external events. This idea, seemingly simple at first glance, has profound and far-reaching implications for one's entire way of life. The Stoics argued that most people labor under the delusion that the source of their suffering or joy lies in external circumstances, the presence or absence of wealth, health, fame, comfort. In reality, they claimed, everything is determined not by the events themselves, but by the meaning we attribute to them. To illustrate this principle, the Stoics use the metaphor of an arrow. The initial pain from a wound is inevitable. This is the first movement of the soul, independent of our will. But all subsequent suffering is our own choice, our agreement that the wound is truly terrible. Thus, the path to freedom lies in reevaluating our automatic judgments about events, in realizing that no event is inherently good or bad. It is only our opinion that makes it so. This approach finds expression in the famous Stoic distinction between things that are within our control and those that are not. The first category includes exclusively our own thoughts, judgments, desires, and actions. That is, all internal processes within our immediate control. The second category includes everything else: our body, property, reputation, career, other people, and indeed any external events. The main cause of human suffering, according to the Stoics, is that people constantly try to control what is beyond their power, such as others' opinions or market fluctuations, while neglecting what they can truly change, their own attitude toward events. The most important concept in Stoic ethics is virtue, arete, understood as the highest good and the only thing of genuine value. Unlike modern simplified notions where virtue is often associated with something moralistic and dull, the Stoics saw it as an expression of supreme wisdom and a path to true freedom. They identified 4 cardinal virtues: practical wisdom, the ability to make right decisions in specific circumstances; courage, not just physical bravery, but moral fortitude; justice, proper relations with others; and temperance, self-control and balance. These virtues were viewed not as separate qualities, but as aspects of a unified whole, the perfected, rational nature of a human being. The Stoics believed that developing one virtue inevitably leads to developing others, just as the corruption of one leads to the degradation of all. For example, one cannot be truly courageous without wisdom, otherwise it would be mere recklessness. Nor can one be wise without courage, as wisdom requires the ability to face difficulties. A special place in Stoicism is occupied by the attitude toward emotions, which is often misunderstood. Contrary to the common stereotype, the Stoics did not advocate complete impassivity or suppression of emotions. Their approach was far more nuanced and psychologically insightful. They distinguished between initial emotional impulses, propathei, which arise involuntarily, and subsequent judgments and assent to these impulses, which are within our control. For example, upon suddenly hearing news of a loved one's death, the initial wave of grief is natural and inevitable. It is a physiological reaction independent of our will. But how we subsequently process this loss, whether we succumb to despair or find the strength to carry on, is already a matter of our choice and work with our own judgments. This approach allows us not to avoid emotions, but to work with them consciously, preventing them from undermining our capacity for rational action. The practical side of Stoicism manifested in various exercises and techniques of mental hygiene, many of which remain valuable today. One of the most famous is the premeditation of evils, premeditatio malorum, the methodical mental envisioning of worst-case scenarios. Unlike ordinary anxiety, this exercise was performed consciously and systematically. By imagining the worst that could happen, The Stoics simultaneously contemplated how they would cope with it, thereby reducing fear of the unknown and preparing themselves for potential hardships. Another important exercise was evening self-reflection, where one would mentally review the day's events, evaluating one's actions from the standpoint of virtue. Seneca describes this practice in detail in his letters, emphasizing its importance for moral improvement. The Stoics also practiced voluntary asceticism, temporary deprivation of comforts and pleasures, such as periods of simple food, sleeping on hard surfaces, etc., to remind themselves that happiness does not depend on external conditions and that one can maintain inner freedom even in hardship. The Stoic doctrine of nature and providence also deserves special attention. The Stoics viewed the cosmos as a single living whole permeated by divine logos, rational principle. In this worldview, all events are interconnected and subject to universal causality. Human reason was understood as part of this cosmic reason, meaning that acceptance of nature's course, amor fati, love of fate, was seen as an expression of wisdom. This did not imply passivity. On the contrary, the Stoics called for active participation in society while maintaining inner acceptance that the outcomes of our efforts are not always within our control. The historical influence of Stoicism is hard to overstate. Its elements permeated Christian ethics, particularly teachings about providence and virtuous living, influenced Enlightenment philosophy, and in the 20th century showed unexpected parallels with principles of cognitive behavioral therapy. Modern psychologists like Albert Ellis and Aaron Beck acknowledge the influence of Stoic ideas on their therapeutic methods. In recent decades, there has been a renewed surge of interest in Stoicism, driven by people's need for reliable psychological tools to navigate increasing instability and information overload. Modern interpretations of Stoicism, such as New Stoicism, adapt ancient principles to 21st century challenges, demonstrating that this philosophy remains a living and relevant tradition. The study of Stoicism is not merely an academic exercise in the history of philosophy, but an opportunity to acquire a time-tested system of thinking that helps maintain clarity of mind and human dignity in the most difficult circumstances. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Herein lies Stoicism's fundamental lesson, understanding that true freedom begins with recognizing the boundaries of our control and cultivating a wise attitude toward what lies beyond them. Stoic philosophy offers not just a set of abstract ideas, but a complete way of life where theory is inseparable from practice. It teaches us to distinguish reality from our projections onto it, to accept what we cannot change, and to work courageously on what is within our power. In a world where external circumstances grow increasingly volatile and unpredictable, Stoicism provides the inner foundation that allows a person to remain themselves, no matter how fate may turn. The depth and universality of Stoic thought explain why this philosophy continues to resonate with people across different eras and cultures. Its principles prove equally valuable for a Roman emperor governing a vast empire and for a modern manager operating in a competitive environment, for an ancient slave seeking inner freedom, and for a contemporary individual striving to maintain autonomy in a digital world. Stoicism reminds us that despite all technological and social changes, the fundamental questions of human existence remain unchanged. How to live with dignity, how to cope with inevitable suffering, how to find genuine meaning in a transient world. The answers offered by Stoic philosophy may not be the only possible ones, but their time-tested wisdom and practical effectiveness make them an invaluable resource for anyone seeking a meaningful and resilient life. Subscribe to the channel and like this video.